کنفرانس در کنگره آمریکا، دخالت فزاینده رژیم ایران در عراق و سوریه، کشتار در اشرف، برنامه اتمی و افزایش اعدام‌ها. 21 نوامبر 2013، 30 آبان ماه 92. لین وستمورلند، نایب رئیس هیئت رهبری کنگره، عضو ارشد کمیته اطلاعات. رندی وبر، عضو هیئت رئیسه کمیته خارجی. دینا روهراباکر، رئیس زیر کمیته اروپا آسیا. قاضی تپپو، رئیس زیر کمیته تروریسم. براد شرمن، نایب رئیس زیر کمیته تروریسم. شیلا جکسون لی، عضو ارشد کمیته قضایی و کمیته امنیت ملی. دنی دیویس، عضو ارشد کمیته تحقیقات و نظارت بر امور دولت، چهره برجسته جنبش مدنی آمریکا. استیو استاکمن، عضو کمیته خارجی. و وزیر تام ریج، سفیر جان بولتون و سفیر مارک گینزبرگ.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to thank not only the members of the staffs of members of Congress who are here, but also those who have traveled near and far to be here this morning on this extraordinarily important event. And I understand the important critical nature of the humanitarian crisis affecting the people who have survived the attack in Ashraf and who are the responsibility of the world and the responsibility particularly of the United States government. I want to start out by saying that we are gathered here too many times for those of us who have started this long journey with you, who are compassionately committed to the cause that you believe in, a free and independent and democratic Iran. The one thing that is important to understand, there's a difference between the aspirations of what we want in Iran and the humanitarian crisis that cries out for resolution for those innocent people who are refugees in Camp Liberty and who deserve to be free. There's no doubt that the fact that they are still in effect imprisoned in Iraq should be unacceptable to those of us who have had the privilege of working in Congress and in the U.S. government. From the moment that the attack took place at Camp Ashraf on September 1st, there has been, for all intents and purposes, within the confines of the United States State Department, a determination not to impute any responsibility or obligation on the government of Iraq. Despite every ounce of evidence to the contrary, that attack was a dastardly crime against humanity that was committed by and on behalf of the government of Iraq against the innocent people who were there merely to protect the possessions of the people at Camp Liberty under the very eyes of the United Nations. In any other circumstance, there would be such an outcry by the United States government against that attack that we would have demanded that people be held responsible, that there would be an absolute obligation for an investigation. But officials in the State Department say, oh no, it wasn't the government of Iraq that was responsible for that dastardly attack. Oh no, it was not the government of Iraq that was taking orders from the mullahs in Iran that orchestrated that attack. And yet, the evidence has slowly but securely piled up. 1 ounce of evidence after the another has now turned into an irrefutable conclusion that the government of Iraq was indeed responsible for the attack, and, more importantly, the taking of 7 hostages that the State Department, in the guise of a Deputy Assistant Secretary, Mr. McGurk, claims are no longer in Iraq. Somehow or other, our State Department has got it into its unfortunate belief that the United States has far more to gain to engage in a cover-up of the facts involving the attack at Camp Ashraf, and they're denying repeatedly that the 7 hostages that were taken are no longer in Iraq. Mr. McGurk has appeared before several committees of Congress to repeatedly attempt to refute any evidence to the contrary in an effort to protect and avoid placing the responsibility on the government of Iraq. And yet, just yesterday, no less an independent, and I underline, a respected independent organization that is highly respected around the world, Amnesty International, issued an urgent report that essentially confirmed what we have been saying from the day that the attack occurred and those hostages were taken hostage, and that is that the hostages are still in Iraq. So I asked Mr. McGurk a question. Mr. McGurk, I, as a former United States ambassador, would want to at least protect the integrity and reputation of the United States government and not engage in further subterfuge in order to protect a government that is not necessarily aligned with the United States' interest in trying to resolve this humanitarian conflict. Wouldn't you, Mr. McGurk, want to at least now recognize? Wouldn't you want to accept the fact that no less an independent and respected organization as Amnesty International is denying your constant accusations that those hostages are no longer in Iraq, and indeed is prepared to confirm that they have independent evidence that those hostages are in Iraq? I call on you, Mr. McGurk, to come up to Congress and to apologize to the American people for continuing to peddle the fiction that they are no longer there. I also want to say the following about their safety and security of those in Camp Liberty. When Secretary Clinton, my good friend, indicated that she wanted the people to leave Camp Ashraf and move to Camp Liberty, she committed the United States government to assure their protection. She committed the United States government, if people would peacefully leave Ashraf and move to Liberty, that the United States government would do everything possible to protect their safety and security until they were relocated. Unfortunately, the bureaucrats in the State Department are not adhering to Mrs. Clinton's pledge to the people in this room and to the American people, and most importantly, to the people at Camp Liberty. The facts, ladies and gentlemen, here are very clear. Do not get caught up in the legacy of retribution and anger that exists within the United States government over the fact that they may or may not approve of the policies of the MEK. That is not the issue here. The issue is truth. The issue is truth versus lie. The issue is whether or not, in the end, the United States government is going to fulfill its pledges. It's important for all of us, not because you are here merely to hear someone like myself. It's important for you to understand the crisis of confidence that affects U.S. government policy to fulfilling its obligations to these poor people who only want safety and freedom and security, not just in another country, but also here in the United States. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. It has been a pleasure to work with this organization for years to achieve justice in the Middle East. I usually force you to endure a long speech, but as it happens, I have to go to the White House in just a few minutes to try to convince them not to accept a bad deal in Geneva. I led a letter with Mike McCall to the Senate urging them to pass the bill which we in the House passed with 400 votes. And to show you where some elements of the foreign policy establishment are, I was greeted with an attack in the editorial pages of a paper I care about a lot, and need to, the LA Times, saying that somehow this was a bad time to impose sanctions. Why did they even come to the table in Geneva? And in the absence of sanctions, what chance do we have? We tried a no-sanctions policy under several administrations, no effective sanctions. How'd that work out for us? But what was particularly annoying about this LA Times editorial is attacked McCall and myself for the fact that our letter urged that we achieve human rights, democracy, and fair elections in Iran someday. When has the United States become so weak that we are told not to even advocate for democracy? Now, the September 1st raid on Camp Ashraf has filled us all with anger and with dread. The idea that the Iraqi government had nothing to do with it is an admission by the Iraqi government that they are ignoring their international obligations to defend Camp Ashraf and Camp Hura. But had nothing to do with it. How many checkpoints did the thugs have to go through in order to reach Camp Ashraf? Somehow they got through. And now this is a government that comes to the United States asking for military aid. We know how they'll use it, as they allow their airspace to be a corridor for thugs moving from Tehran to Damascus. And then when they say, well, we couldn't stop the planes, which of these planes would fly if they were going to face a challenge by Iraqi military forces? And where is the request from Baghdad to Ankara or to Riyadh or to the United States saying we want to stop these thugs from flying over our country and committing war crimes in Syria? Please help us and intercept these planes. Trust me, it wouldn't tax the efforts of the air forces of the United States, Saudi Arabia, or Turkey to challenge those planes in the air over Iraq. We cannot provide aid to Iraq unless Iraq is dedicated to human rights in its own country and an end to war crimes in Syria. I especially want to thank you, and this often goes unstated, for the role the MEK played in exposing to the world Iran's nuclear weapons program. And now it is time to use all of our diplomatic pressure to say that we have to honor the UN resolutions, we have to honor international law. That starts by restoring the 17,500 T-walls, and I'm proud to have joined with Ted Poe. Ted and I are the chair and ranking member on the Terrorism and Nonproliferation Subcommittee in introducing Resolution 89 to condemn the previous attacks on Camp Liberty and to call for those terrorists to be brought to justice. Thank you very much. Thank you for what you do, and I will be a voice at the White House pushing in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It seems hard to believe that once again we are confronted with this tragedy in Iraq of an attack on either Camp Ashraf or Camp Liberty, and seeing these innocent civilians, refugees, killed, wounded, and kidnapped. There is, I think, a long history here that we've recited so many times. It seems hard to believe that the State Department hasn't figured out at this point that there's a humanitarian problem here that needs to be alleviated. But let me try to put it in some context, because I think there are reasons why we're seeing this danger recur again and again, and why the MEK is victimized in this tragic way without our government responding effectively. And I do think it has a political motivation. It's not a partisan motivation, but it's a political motivation. And it has several aspects to it. Let me try and cover that. First is, I think that the fate of the MEK has been tied in the minds of senior officials at the State Department too long to the issue of the nuclear weapons program by the regime in Iran today. That the view that somehow or another the nuclear weapons program could be negotiated out of existence, and that the mindset of the Ayatollahs in Tehran could be affected if the MEK were treated in a way that suited them rather than suited the truth. So we find that in the late 1990s, the State Department adds the MEK to the list of foreign terrorist organizations without adequate evidence at the time, but clearly in an effort to persuade the regime in Tehran that the administration was open to dialogue on the nuclear weapons issue, and that the regime would see that when one of their worst enemies was given this designation as a foreign terrorist organization, which was obviously intended to cripple its ability to operate in the United States and worldwide, that would soften the mullahs up and make them more receptive to dealing on the nuclear weapons program. Now, I think that was a mistake from the outset. The fact is that being designated as a foreign terrorist organization is extraordinarily serious. There are statutory requirements you have to meet to do that, and that the State Department did not meet those requirements, that the MEK did not satisfy the definition that the statute requires. As Mark Ginsburg said, there has been an overwhelming and really unprecedented rising of bipartisan support, first to take the MEK off the list of foreign terrorist organizations, which Secretary of State Clinton did 2 years ago, that the MEK was certainly not only not an FTO, it had gone out of its way to cooperate with the United States over the years. And there was something that went along with that, that was a carrying forward of the commitment our military made to the inhabitants of Camp Ashraf back in 2003, and that is, and to me this is the breach of a commitment by the United States government on a bipartisan basis now over several administrations that we have not given the inhabitants of Liberty and Ashraf the kind of protection that they need. This is another embarrassment, a stain on the reputation of the United States. We have hostages now taken from Camp Ashraf at the behest of the Iranians. I think there's little or no doubt that the al-Maliki regime has been acting in concert with Iran, and for 2 months now, the State Department's inability or unwillingness to talk about what actually happened at this attack on Camp Ashraf is motivated in large part because of concern about somehow adversely affecting the negotiations with Iran that are going on in Geneva as we speak here today on the nuclear weapons program. This is something, this is an entirely self-inflicted wound by the United States on our reputation for honesty and credibility. But the people who are most adversely affected are the ones formerly in Ashraf and in Liberty today. That this is something that I think members of Congress on a bipartisan basis that should prize the American reputation for humanitarianism, that should prize our belief that the United States has always had a leading role internationally, both through the High Commissioner for Refugees and on our own in providing protection and assistance to refugees. These are people that we ourselves designated as protected persons. We didn't rely on somebody else's designation, and we're the ones letting them down. This is also a massive failure of the United Nations system. I think we have seen documented over several years now that the UN's assistance mission in Iraq, UNAMI, has been not an arm of the United Nations, not an arm of the member governments, but effectively under the control of the al-Maliki regime. This is utterly inexcusable. And it's inexcusable. We thought with a change of personnel at UNAMI that perhaps things would get better. It's only more of the same. It's still business as usual. And this is something for those who want to see how the UN actually operates, not the gauzy ideals of the framers of the UN, but what the UN actually does in practice. This should be an object lesson that the UN's ability to function in ways that its member governments direct is very, very hard. And it's also a massive failure for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The High Commissioner operates under a treaty obligation to provide protection and assistance for refugees. It's true that UNAMI is authorized by the UN Security Council, but no Security Council resolution can trump an international treaty that gives the High Commissioner the responsibilities that he has. Amply funded and supported for decades by the United States, we see the High Commissioner unwilling to stand up for his mandate, unwilling to take on UNAMI, unwilling to go to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and insist that the Secretary General himself direct UNAMI to do the right thing. This is a circumstance where the High Commissioner for Refugees has jeopardized the credibility of this international organization in ways that will be very, very difficult to repair down the road, because other countries will see that determined enough when they face an internal refugee situation, they can push UNHCR around, and other elements of the UN system will not support it. So I think we've got to focus attention here in the United States. We can blame UNAMI, we can blame the High Commissioner, we can blame the al-Maliki regime, we can blame the regime in Tehran, and there's plenty of blame to go around there. But it should be the responsibility of the United States to help fix this crisis that we helped create. And there are several ways that we can do it. I hope that Congress will get involved to press the administration on this point. One is to grant asylum to the inhabitants of Camp Liberty in the United States right now. Bring them to the United States. Get them out of this prison that they're in. Get them out of this death trap that they're in, so we can provide here conditions of safety, and then see what their ultimate country of resettlement might be. We can accompany that, we should accompany that with a high commitment to resettle some of the inhabitants of Camp Liberty right here in the United States. But we should certainly bend every effort to get the reprocessing accomplished as soon as possible, whether it's in the United States or some other country that might be willing to serve as a temporary relocation. We cannot afford to come back here in another few weeks or another few months and see another tragedy. We need to resolve this situation and stop talking about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I want to thank the organization of the Iranian American communities, and I want to thank also those same communities that are in Georgia for you giving me the opportunity to address you today, and thank you for your tireless effort in pursuing a free Iran. As a member of the House Intelligence Committee, I am fully aware, as all you are, of the danger that a nuclear Iran would pose not only to the United States and our allies, but to every country around the world. This is a serious issue that it must be addressed, which is why many of my colleagues, including Mr. Sherman and I, have continued to keep pressure on the current administration to do what's right, and I hope Mr. Sherman greatly succeeds in his trip to the White House today. In that light, I recently joined 23 of my colleagues and sent a letter to Secretary Kerry expressing my grave concerns with his recent nuclear negotiations with Iran. These nuclear negotiations are nothing more yet than another opportunity to Iran to stall for time and continue their nuclear weapon development. As a supporter of state-sponsored terrorism around the world and a vigorous violator of human rights, Iran has continued to thumb its nose at the rest of the world, from the assistance of being provided to Assad and Syria to the increase in torture and executions in Iran. The current regime has been able to operate without fear of reprisal, and that only gets worse should Iran acquire the nuclear weapon. Unfortunately, those suffering the most under the current regime are the Iranian people, the vast majority of which support a democratic Iran, where they can live free and without fear. And that yearning for freedom also extends to the thousands of Iranians currently at Camp Liberty, who continue to face unwarranted and unprovoked attacks. Even though the U.S. has urged the government of Iraq to do more to protect these innocent civilians, I know that you in this room have friends and family there at Camp Liberty who have suffered a great deal at the hands of the Iranian government while trying to bring peace and democracy to your country. The United States needs to do more. We need to hold Iraqi government accountable for its lack of protection of liberty. And it's important for all of you to know that there are those in our government, including many of my colleagues and I, who will continue to pressure the President and Secretary Kerry to remain strong when dealing with Iran, and to use the full force of American power of our government to make sure that there's a safe environment for those living at Camp Liberty. Again, I want to thank you for your commitment to democracy and freedom for people not only from your country, but from people all over the world. Again, thank you for having me, and God bless us all.
Howdy. While you are here, your friends, your loved ones, they're halfway across the world, and they're in constant oppression and turmoil and fear from, I think, several governments. Since 2009, there have been 5 assaults, attacks on your friends and your neighbors and your loved ones in Camp Liberty and Camp Ashraf. 5 attacks. And during that period of time, not one person responsible for those attacks has been brought to justice. Not the killers and not the governments who allowed it to happen. This ought not to be. In this latest attack, you all are aware of it, the one that took place in September. There were 42 that survived. Witnesses. I used to be a prosecutor before I was a judge in Texas. And it was just elementary that you talk to the witnesses of a crime. None of these witnesses have been talked to about who committed this crime. Why not? It is an obligation that they be talked to find out who did it. Because you see, this fifth attack is like the other four. The culprits who came in with machine guns, killing people, assassinating unarmed Iranian dissidents. When they came in, not any of them were held accountable when they left after their massacre of your friends and your neighbors. So not all is well in the world. But we give thanks in this country for you being here and putting up the fight and the resistance against oppression halfway across the world, where your friends and your neighbors and your loved ones are fighting as well. So we thank you in this great land. This fight is not over. It is not going away, even though many governments just wish you would go away. It's not going to happen. We're not going to let it happen. And in this in this latest assault, this is what I think ought to happen. I'll say this to begin with. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but I've never been called a diplomat. So I'm not very diplomatic about what I say. But I think while we're talking to Maliki, when we had the chance, and he comes over here to the United States dragging the sack, wanting to get some more of that American money, we had the chance, and we should have taken it, to look him straight in the eye and say, look at here. That's one word. Look at here. You turn over those captive hostages that are in the possession of Iraq. You determine who committed this crime. You arrest those people, or there's no American money going to you, Mr. Maliki. And we ought to mean it. And we ought to just stop sending that money over there till those people who committed the crime show up, till those hostages that were kidnapped show up, and that people be held accountable. I think that might actually work. But we can't be bluffing, and we can't just sit down and say, oh, let's talk about it. You know, we can't do that. We have to mean what we say. So, stay in the fight for that very important word, liberty. In Tehran today, liberty is just a flame that's barely a flicker because of the oppression of the government. But there will be a day of reckoning. There will be a day when the people of Iran will be able to take their country back. And the sun will rise, and that flame of liberty will burn very brightly, because you will take back your wonderful country and be able to join us in an assembly similar to this, but not in Washington, D.C., but in Tehran. And that's just the way it is. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and to share this moment with all of you. And I think one of the reasons is that I firmly believe that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat everywhere. I also want to thank Amnesty International for what it does. But I also agree with those of you who are here, and I commend you, because the road to freedom is often very long. I come from an environment and I come from a people who know that. But we also know that they who dare to struggle also expect to win. They also know that just having an idea is not enough, that we must be involved in the practice. We must protest. We must get arrested. We must oftentimes be what it looks like a small entity going up against the strongest of powers. And since I'm accustomed to that, being black in America and being black in the diaspora, and I know that struggle, strife, and pain are the prerequisites for change. I know that if there is no struggle, then there is no progress. The struggle may be a moral one, it may be a physical one, but there must be struggle. So I'm pleased to join you and join with you in the struggle for humanity, the struggle for humane treatment, the struggle to try and make sure that those who are being held hostage, that those whose freedom has been taken away, that the day will come when not only will they be free, but freedom will reign throughout the diaspora. And we will not keep having these instances in these places where one cannot walk where they want to walk, say what they want to say, do what they want to do without the likelihood that they will be trampled on. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here.